Asalaamu alaikum, I'm Avalon, and welcome to Reborn Muslim, the podcast. So a little bit about me. I took my Shahada in March of 2020. Before that, I was a Christian. I was born into a Christian home, and then I fell into atheism for 2 years before eventually accepting Islam, alhamdulillah. I also make content on Instagram and YouTube to help and advise reverts on their journey and just provide a safe place for reverts to grow and connect with other reverts, because it can be very lonely and very challenging to be a revert, especially in the West, in non-Muslim countries. I'm a vegan of 4 years, and I was born, raised, and currently live in Southern California. I am completely addicted to boba and Lord of the Rings. And I'm also a PhD student, currently studying applied social psychology and researching white nationalism in the US. So why did I start this podcast? So as I already mentioned, I make content online for reverts and just, generally Islamic content. And as much as I love doing that, one thing I've always felt limited by and kind of, this constraint that I didn't really love is the fact that I could never post longer content. It would always be, like a minute maximum or a few minutes maximum. And I have a lot to say, I have a lot of experiences to share and advice to give. And I love doing YouTube because I can post longer content. But I actually have experience with podcasting specifically. I've hosted 2 podcasts now, so I have a good amount of experience, and it's always been my favorite platform. Like, of all the different platforms I've made content for, I just always come back to podcasts. I really, really love podcasting. So I kind of have, I've had this idea for a while that at some point I want to make an Islamic podcast and a podcast about being a revert, because honestly, there's not that many. In terms of what to expect with this podcast, there's a variety of things. So firstly, there's a series that I call Revert Basics, which is exactly what the name implies. It just teaches other reverts what I wish I knew when I first accepted Islam. I make Revert Basics videos on Instagram and YouTube currently, and the thing I always reiterate in these videos is that I'm not a scholar, so if you have more specific questions, you should pursue the answers from a scholar. And so really the idea behind these videos is just giving you the basics, just the bare minimum, just something to get you started so that you're aware of these things. And then when you have more specific questions, you can go to the masjid, you can ask, actual scholars and sheikhs for more knowledge that I can't provide for you. I also plan on making episodes about struggles that I've gone through, just struggles that reverts in general go through and strategies that I've used to overcome them. And just in general, my experiences as a revert to Islam. So things that I've noticed, experiences I've had, good or bad, and just kind of life as a revert. And to sum it up, I really want to engage in discussions about being Muslim in the modern world, in the Western world, in a non-Muslim country, and how to stay true to your faith in these secular times that we're living in. Because I hear from people in Muslim countries all the time saying, this isn't just a thing in the West. Even here in Muslim countries, it's become very secularized, and it's hard to stay true to your faith because you don't fit in for that reason. So that's just kind of broadly what I want to talk about, specifically through the lens, though, of being a revert, because that's what I am. So the last thing I want to go over is why I named this podcast Reborn Muslim. So as reverts, people sometimes ask us, why do you say revert instead of convert? And if you know the meaning behind it, then great. But if not, I'm going to tell you right now. So the meaning behind it is that instead of converting to Islam, we're actually reverting, because we believe everyone is born Muslim and they either continue being a Muslim, in other words, they're raised into a Muslim household, or they stray away from Islam and then come back to Islam later in life. That's why we say they revert to Islam. That's why we're reverts. So something I've noticed is that, so we have that name, right? Reverts. But then when we're talking about somebody who's not a revert, we have to have a name for them. Just in discussion, there needs to be a word for it, right? So often what people say is born Muslims. And when people say born Muslims, they're talking about people who are raised into the fold of Islam. Their family's Muslim. They might even be in a Muslim country. In other words, they didn't come to Islam later in life. And while, this is just a thing that we say, it's just an easy way to refer to these people who are not reverts, I think it's actually misleading, because The reality is, as I just mentioned, even us reverts, we're born Muslims too. It's just that we are reborn. So that's where the idea came from, is that, we're all born Muslims, but for us reverts, we didn't live a Muslim life. We were reborn into Islam later in life, alhamdulillah. So that's all I'm going to mention in this, initial trailer episode. This one will be coming out with the actual first episode, inshallah. So be sure to look for that. It should be out if you're listening to this now. Thank you so much for your support in advance. And I can't wait for you to hear the podcast. Asalaamu alaikum.